Welcome to Authentic Living with Roxanne, a place where we have conscious conversations about things that really matter in our lives. And now here's your host, Roxanne Derhaj.
Our interview last week was so good that we decided to turn it into a two-part series. If you missed last week, you'll find the link in the show notes. Hi everyone, it's Roxanne Derhaj of Authentic Living with Roxanne. Thanks for tuning in again today. Today I have Wade Thomas, and he's an executive coach, and he talks about dealing with executives at the heart level, which is something, as most of you know, that I talk about all the time. So I'm going to say that most of us out there are trying to figure out the most effective ways to lead, I would say prior to 2 years ago, but even more so in the kind of the pressures of the present economic times. What if you have leaders that they don't know the difference between, or maybe they have experienced it, but they kind of think, when I was an executive for years, Wade, I got the message, either implicit or explicit, that you leave Roxanne, the mother and wife, at the front corporate door, then you get on that corporate elevator, you perform as an executive. When you get back, then you're executive Roxanne for 12 hours or 10 hours. And then when you jump back on that elevator, then you become Roxanne, the mother, the sister, the wife, all that stuff, right? So we have a lot of that thinking still there in the separateness, which I know in the last little while, we haven't had that. But do you still have leaders that don't know how to gauge that? Like, how is it that I know I'm connecting, but I'm not being too intrusive? So I'm just curious how you might deal with a scenario like that. I want to connect with you, Wade. You're my employee, but I feel like I'm getting into your business. But I want to be empathetic, but I want to be empathetic in a professional way without getting too personal.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big one, right? And again, it's something that we've always been taught and has never been real. There's never been a Roxanne as the mother and a Roxanne as the executive. I never personally made that distinction either. It wasn't like I could turn off what happened, in my personal life and go to work and then turn that off. And nowadays, with the advent of the technology, you can't do it. In fact, companies don't want their employees to do it.
Right.
I mean, how many emails do you get after 5 o'clock when you've gone home? How many text messages or IMs or whatever the communication method du jour is? And so that's real. There is no separate person. There's only a whole person. But we've always been taught as leaders that we don't get into people's personal lives. And my question is, why not? And there's not a good answer for that. So how do you handle the actual kind of one-on-one conversation? And the nitty-gritty of it is, you got to get over that fear. Research shows that most people want their leaders to have some knowledge or be involved at some level in their personal lives. That level varies, but most people want that. So you can't be afraid of that. And then you ask the questions, and you can start very broad, how's your day going at 8 a.m. or whatever, so it can bring in how are things going at home? And, if you go too far, you're going to find out, because if you're really, a good leader and you're empathizing, you're listening, and you'll feel those pushbacks. And, it's not the leader's role to be the psychotherapist, but it is the leader's role to be supportive of the whole person, not just the work person. The leaders that really are effective and really have the high engagement from their people, they're involved with the whole person.
For sure. And I think, I would say that most leaders have the abilities to communicate, to have gotten to the level, especially where you're talking at the senior leadership level. But now we're trying to have them connect on a deeper level to know enough about what the key drivers to impact performance. That's just not based on numbers, but it's also based on what are the things that drive numbers, which are people, and what motivates people to come to work, be completely present, be productive, not feel like they have to be separate. And then I think most of us want to do, I mean, you or I know with my job, when I was executive, I spent more time there oftentimes than being at home. And of course, but I was juggling all the pressures of being a new mom and traveling and, customers and everything that was going on. So you're constantly juggling a lot of things. And, I would say that I had one of the most authentic leaders that led me. And the one thing that he knew very well is he knew me very, very well. And that he knew, obviously the stage that I was at and some of my pressures, even though I was under a lot of pressures with my portfolio that I was managing, but he was always able to say, he would joke around and he'd say, Durhaj, what do you need? And I'm like, every time I kind of got close to his office in a joking way, because sometimes it may have been that I just wanted to touch base because I've been traveling so much, or I had a real problem with a customer, but it was always the same. So he figured out that we had that kind of synergy where he could joke with me and I'd be like, oh, I really need something this time. And then he'd say, well, my doors are always open. So there was there could be something catastrophic that was going on with an account that I was dealing with, to something really, really small, but I felt like I could engage in any way. So obviously he figured out those things, and I'm talking, 20, 25 years ago now. He engaged me in such a way that I loved what I did, but I always wanted to make sure that he knew how much I valued his direction as well.
Yeah, and the fact that you're telling me this now, 25 years later, is a testimony to how powerful that leadership is, right? You've never forgotten them. And I worked with a chief operating officer, for many years, who, is very memorable. He got to know everybody. It didn't matter what level you were, he knew everybody. But here was kind of his secret. He let them know him first. Oh. He was vulnerable. He was open. He talked about what was going on in his life. And here you have, number 2 guy in a company, basically, talking to the lowest level data entry clerk, about his life. And, and he walked around every morning. He didn't go straight to his office. I had other executives that, went up the back staircase in their office. He walked right through, stopped and talked to everybody in a cubicle, and I still, I have a book out there, and he's, I've used
is he in your book? And likewise with my, director as well, he's in mine, because I cite him as being, teaching me. So, and I was quite young as well as an executive, how impressionable he was on me, and how it allowed me to lead that much more effectively with the different environments that I've been in since.
Yeah. And he's in the book, and he's in the book several times. And here's the great thing. Not long after I released the book, I had a former manager level employee of mine that worked in my organization, and sent me a screenshot of the story from the book with a circle around it, and said, this is who it is. And she knew, even though I didn't use his name.
Right. Isn't that amazing? Because, I say likewise, and I'm sure you see it too. Bad leaders get as much airplay as good leaders, right? But what they often do is, they can infect an environment so quickly, and the impact can be so far and wide, versus like really good leaders, they're remembered for years and years and years. Like I'm talking about my colleague, his name was Richard Siegel, 25 years ago, and your, CEO, which is like in the second, especially, somebody in finance as well. You're like, they shouldn't be a connector, right? Should they? But obviously this particular man had those qualities as well.
Yeah.
When you work with your leaders, you say you work with the top 20 tier of any organization. And is there certain things that you work with each individual one to kind of figure out how their teams are doing? Are there sort of core fundamental skills that you're teaching, or do you individually decide what each individual leader within that 20 needs, And do you create a like an individualized plan per leader, or is it kind of a broad brush way?
No, it's a very individualized, and I can't teach compassion, empathy if I don't start with getting the empathy with my client,
Mhm.
and understanding what it is they're exactly going through.
Right.
So I don't have this off-the-shelf program. What I have is a toolkit. I don't even know how many there are. I'm constantly adding to it as I come up with different situations, but over 100 different tools that I'm going to apply to whatever situation is. And oh, by the way, I might tweak it because maybe I created a tool 4 years ago before everybody was on Zoom, and so and so I'm not constantly changing with the environment, but it really starts with learning who you're working with.
Of course. So again, you're starting with basic connection, which is what all of us have to do as coaches to get to know someone versus getting into work, right? Because if there's no connection, you're not getting the who, what, when, and why kind of that keeps you alive and keeps you motivated. Then you get to know that about the leader, and then you drill down from there. So tell us how, from your work, what kind of returns. The name of my book is ROR, Return on Relationships. So let's talk about the money part of things, right? We always talk about the ROI. So when you really work with heart-based leadership and you drill down, like you said, you work to the top 20, what kind of returns are some of these companies experiencing quarter by quarter? When is it quarter by quarter? Does it take a couple of quarters for them to actualize it? How long before they actually start to experience some of the actual fiscal gains?
It varies, and it depends on what level and really what discipline you're in, right? So there's certain functional areas in any company that drive value in a company, right? Most companies, sales, right? And there might be some other, functional areas to tie into that. But for instance, sales, and you can see a return within a quarter easily, just by a couple of tweaks, and pretty significant. I generally won't take on, my minimum is I want to get 10x ROI.
Okay.
And I'm not going to take on a project that's not going to get that. But oftentimes it goes a lot higher. If I'm working with, a top executive, I mean, the return on a $10,000 or $20,000 investment is going to be in the millions, and especially for a big company. And so really substantial returns, and a lot of times people don't think about that when it comes to the relationship stuff and the employee driven stuff. It's not as tangible as maybe buying a new machine in a manufacturing world, or buying a piece of land in real estate, whatever it might be, but it's real. If you can make a vice president of sales, 10% more effective, and they're responsible for $100 million portfolio, you just got yourself $10 million there.
Right.
$10,000 investment. So it's really, phenomenal the impact that these kind of things can have.
Absolutely. And the thing is, like when I was in the employee assistance world, which is basically psychological wellness, when the more people are engaged, right, and managers or leaders are able to intervene in a way to understand that, let's say someone's not achieving, and they're learning to have the proper conversations because they know their employees, they're getting, they're doing the things that you're talking about. And let's say it's something that's a little bit bigger than the leader can deal with, then they get them the appropriate support elsewhere. Most of those people that were identified early were able to take the steps by getting, say, EAP support and stayed at work, and they would fill out feedback forms that would say, had they not gotten the help that they needed. So maybe it was an issue with a relationship, or maybe it's parent-child conflict. Generally, a lot not related to the workplace. Most people would say they would have missed more than 5 to 7 days on average sometimes. Because they got the right intervention, they were able to deal with what they needed in a confidential way and then come back to performance. So the things that you're talking about is it's very important. We all know that, because then things like if people are happier, you're not seeing as much incidental absences. You're not seeing as much short-term disability. I mean, long-term, we know how horribly expensive that is. We're not seeing as much arbitrations or conflict in the workplace or conflict between management and union, depending on the environment. So, but the core thing that I'm wondering, when a new client comes to you, a new company, are you able to kind of gauge, do you do an organizational macro assessment of kind of some of the core things around compassion and empathy before you start to deal with them? Or are you actually doing it by more of a verbal assessment with some of the key players?
It's generally the latter. It is getting to know who it is I'm going to be working with, and then trying to understand the business. Usually I'm talking to kind of people the next step up.
Okay.
Or if it's a CEO, then I get a much broader feel for it, right?
Right.
But the reality is until I really engage, with the organization in a deep way, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Even if I'm asking the CEO questions, chances are he or she doesn't know. Because oftentimes they're too far removed. So it's really that's usually part of the first phase of my coaching process is discovery, and that's really where that fits. Is discovery, figuring out kind of what is the state. Surprisingly, there's not as much variability as I might expect.
We often think that different sector, different types of business,
right.
Those types of things, but there are definite trends that you would see after a while.
Yeah, there's outliers in either direction, but yeah,
of course, there's always that, right? So let's say you're a senior leader up to a CEO listening to this now, and you're saying, I think I'm pretty empathetic or compassionate. What kind of things, and they're not sure, they think, I think I do okay. If I would do the litmus test, I would probably be kind of maybe somewhere in the middle. What would be some ways that they can start to reflect about their level of compassion and empathy to kind of decide if they need coaching like what yourself or I do? What kind of things would you suggest?
So there's two different, so I lump compassion and empathy together, but they're two different things. So I starting with empathy, ask yourself, how much do I really know about what's going on in my employee's life? Mm-hmm. And then I might take it the next step. What about their employees? And you start there. I remember one of my first experiences as an HR person. I was in a manufacturing environment. New plant manager came in, and it was interesting. He hid in his office for a week. I'm still not quite sure what all that was about. Basically, the only one that had access was me and the finance person. And but then after that was up, every leader in the organization had to come in and bring their whole teams in, introduce them to him. But not, this is Mary who works in this. No, he wanted to know personal stuff. How many kids? What's their marital status? What are their hobbies? Those kind of things. You know how much empathy was gained really fast as these leaders rushed around? But asking yourself, could you answer that question? If you were in that situation, if you had worked for, and his name was Ron Page, if you had worked for Ron, would you have been able to stand in there and do that introduction?
You know what? Now I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about my team. Do I know, and I do, but I'm just thinking, but I have a small team. But again, sometimes these companies can be so huge, to your point, not just do I know the leader, but do the people that lead under them.
Yeah.
So that's two levels, tiers of understanding that you really have to really funnel down and do, that due diligence or homework to really start to ask those questions. I love that.
And I would take it a step further, or maybe a step in a different direction too. So I'd also ask myself, do I know what gets in their way at the workplace? Because a lot of times you don't. A lot of times you think you do, but do you know that the copy machine goes out every 6 hours? Or do you know that your chief accounting officer won't approve anything until he reads a 75-page document? Do you know that before you make any capital investment, there's a 350-page document everybody has to fill out, but only 30 pages are being read? Do you know those things? That's another test to have is, do you know personal stuff and the work stuff?
So that's empathy. So now with compassion, then let's now that we've parsed those out, how would you ask them to gain or garner their sense of compassion or level of compassion?
So go through your interactions for the day. Were there opportunities that you could have been more compassionate? Or were there opportunities where you really nailed it? You were really compassionate, because you got to do both. Because you have to have self-compassion as well. You can't beat yourself up. But do that on a daily basis. What were these interactions, and were there opportunities where I could have been better?
Right.
That really leads to a level of introspection that is really going to give yourself a good picture of where you really are. Because we don't like to do that introspection.
And in my book, I talk a lot about awareness, right? Like, reflection, and because there's so much, like, you're right, if most of our behavior is unconscious, and of course leaders are very busy and they're running the business and they have all the business units, but then if you're not, and you spoke to that really quickly, it's like, how are you caring, or how are you being compassionate of yourself? None of us are perfect, and what are you learning from those interactions? So some of them you're like, oh, I hit it out of the park, and the other ones you're like, oh, I was rushed, or I was stressed, or I was short, with Wade when I saw him there, but it was because I had 3 things going in my mind. So those are the learning pieces that I know that I work through with leaders, so that they can start to say, oh, I do this when I'm like this. I'm better when I'm like this. So it's taking that time, and then just learning, like you said, from that reflective lens on a daily basis.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. And not to beat yourself up.
Absolutely.
Make sure you're focused on the learnings.
So Wade, this has been an amazing conversation. I think you and I probably could talk for a lot longer. And so I know you have a program that you're launching or have launched. I want you to share with the listeners where they can get a hold of you if they want to do a discovery, or to know a little bit more about your program.
Okay, so first of all, in order to get a hold of me, you can go to my website, which is www.aimtowinllc.com, and or you can follow me on LinkedIn, which is Wade Thomas, Business Impact Coach. Those are the best ways. But my programs, I've always done kind of high-end coaching programs where we meet for an hour or so every couple of weeks, and we go for at least a year. Usually, we keep going, and those are great. But one of the things that I realize is that not everybody can take advantage of them, whether it be from a cost standpoint or a time standpoint. So I've recently launched what I call laser focused coaching. And basically, for a price point, it's under $1,000. It's unlimited 15-minute coaching sessions with me for a year. And the idea here is, in 15 minutes, what I can do is I can really kind of set you up and put you in a place where you're heading in the right direction. But then I give you homework, and you take and you do the rest on your own. And then, you can schedule another, after you've done the rest on your own, you can schedule some more time with me. And so this puts a lot more learning burden on you, but you still have access to me and all the experiences and things that I've gone through. And so really excited about this because it allows more people to get involved. It allows companies may have an entire team. If you want to put 30 or 40 leaders through something, at a full rate, that's a lot of money. And so this kind of provides that ability to really spread the knowledge down, deeper into your organization. So I call it Laser Focus Program. That is not on my website. I'm publicizing it more through referrals and through podcast episodes like this one. I'm making it available to that group. And so the way to do that is just reach out to me on LinkedIn, and we can kind of talk through it.
Awesome. It sounds quite interesting. I'm sure you're going to get a lot of business with that. So for everyone, thanks so much. Connection is key. Understand the people around you, and it impacts, compassion and empathy impacts everything else. So for all our listeners, if you haven't signed up for the podcast, please go on and sign up so you can know about all these amazing guests that I have. So go to roxanne.com and sign up for the podcast. And again, Wade, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for tuning in to Authentic Living with Roxanne, creating the space for positive, healthy change. Roxanne is a keynote speaker, psychotherapist, and coach. To work with Roxanne, visit roxannederhage.com/blueprint. We'll see you next time on Authentic Living with Roxanne.